No one speaks their name. Not anymore. Not in whispers, not in warnings. Just silence, taught by fear, enforced by trauma. But once, long ago, we tried to conquer them. And in return, they made the stars burn. This is the tale of the forgotten war, the day humanity didn't go extinct, it made extinction a weapon. No one dared speak the name. Not out of reverence, but out of fear that saying it might call them back. For 300 years, the galaxy had held its breath, pretending the silence meant safety. But history, like a wound, never truly heals when it's buried alive. Keth Illen leaned over the cracked databank, hands trembling. The screen flickered, coded fragments, scrambled logs, censored remnants, but something had slipped through. A single line repeated in a language older than the Concordat itself. Observer access detected. Reconstructing truth. He wasn't supposed to be here. The Concordat's archivum core strictly forbade access to level red memory vaults, but Keth didn't care. His entire career as a junior historian had been spent cataloging erased wars, doctored treaties, and noble lies. But this was different. These weren't just censored events. They were deliberately erased species. One, specifically. Humanity. He tapped deeper. Images emerged, faint, static blurred footage of burning fleets, shattered moons, strange-looking soldiers descending from orbital platforms like fallen gods. The file titles were stripped, but one log was left intact. Project Abolish. He stared. Not a battle plan. Not a conflict. A verdict. Keth's breath caught in his throat. The humans weren't defeated. They were removed. Not physically. Not through genocide. Through terror. The kind of fear that rewrites the story so thoroughly, no one even remembers the enemy's name. He heard it before he saw it, a slow pulse, like a heartbeat in the archive room's low hum. A single speaker, cracked, ancient, hissed alive with garbled audio. He stepped closer. A voice spoke. Not alien. Not mechanical. Human. You think silence means peace, it said. But silence is just the scar tissue where truth once lived. Then the screen went black. The next day, Keth resigned from his post. The council sent an envoy to question him. He didn't answer. He already had what he needed, coordinates embedded in a corrupted file, long since scrubbed from the Concordat's official maps. Sector 0. Officially marked non-existent. He borrowed a survey ship under the pretense of stellar radiation study and hired a small crew of freelancers, each one skilled, each one disillusioned. None of them knew where they were going, not exactly. He told them it was an old station, maybe Concordat era, maybe older. A rumor. They didn't ask questions. Credits spoke louder than doubts. After 2 weeks of silent drift beyond the fringe systems, the stars began to dim unnaturally. Sector 0 had no beacons, no routes, no gravitational signatures. Just cold. And echoes. Keth stood at the observation deck, watching the darkness swallow the last visible light behind them. You sure this place even exists? The pilot asked, tapping his console. We're floating through a ghost's graveyard. Keth didn't look away. We're not looking for ghosts. We're looking for the thing that made them. The ship's alarms pinged. A signal, weak, ancient, repeating every 17 seconds. The pilot's brow furrowed. It's not Concordat. Format's wrong. Sounds human. They followed the signal. And found the sky broken. Derelict structures drifted like steel corpses, satellites with war scars, hulls painted in a language that didn't match any known archive. In the center, a planetary body, its surface scorched glass, atmosphere long gone. Aurelia. It shouldn't have survived. The moment they breached orbit, the ship powered down. Everything went dark except emergency systems. A message blinked on the main screen. Passive signal detected. Non-aggressive. Access permitted. None of the crew spoke. The pilot tried rebooting. Nothing worked. Keth smiled faintly. They're watching us. The ship descended slowly, like being cradled by invisible hands. They landed in the middle of what looked like a dead city. Buildings torn by fire but still standing. Roads buried in ash. Monuments melted into slag and remolded into something else, something almost beautiful. On the largest structure, etched into obsidian black metal, were 3 words in galactic standard. We remember everything. Inside, the walls pulsed faintly. Not with electricity, but with memory. Holograms triggered as they passed. Glimpses of another time. A battlefield, humans in strange armor, standing against monstrous Concordat walkers, fighting back not with superior weapons, but with raw adaptability. Turning wreckage into artillery. Converting their own pain into tactics. A mother pulling her injured son from rubble, then lifting a rifle and shooting down a drone with one hand, still humming to him. A war council, alien leaders yelling over one another. One of them screams, "They don't surrender! They learn! Every time we strike, they get stronger!" A final message flashed in red. "You erased our name, but you remembered our fear. That was enough." The holograms faded. One of the crew, a silent engineer named Eric, muttered, "This wasn't a war. It was an awakening." Keth stepped forward. "No. It was a mirror. We saw what we were. They saw what we could become. The Council feared them because humans broke the rules. Not of physics. Of obedience." Another room opened as they moved. A cryopod chamber. Long dead. Except one. Lit. Active. Inside floated a figure, taller than any man Keth had seen. Skin lined with scars, chest embedded with old tech, eyes closed, fists clenched. Vitals, green. Designation, Colonel Malik Voss. Keth's voice was barely a whisper. "He's been waiting." As if in answer, the pod hissed. Gas vented. Metal unlocked. 1,000 years of silence ended with one breath. The man stepped out slowly. Looked around. His eyes locked onto Keth. "You're not Concordat." Keth shook his head. "Historian. Valari. I found the logs." Voss's voice was rough, but sharp. "So you know what they did?" "I know enough." Voss nodded once. "Good. Then you understand what comes next." Keth hesitated. "Revenge?" Voss tilted his head. "No. We already had that. Now comes the reunion." He walked past them, barefoot on metal, leaving a faint trail of heat. As he moved, the structure lit up. Systems hummed. Signals activated. Orbiting debris shifted in alignment. Across the galaxy, dormant beacons flickered on. One by one. System by system. A sound returned to the stars, low, heavy, undeniable. A name. Spoken without voice. Humanity. Keth stood frozen. He understood now. They hadn't vanished. They'd gone silent on purpose. Because they never left. The silence inside the vault wasn't just absence of sound, it was pressure, thick and waiting. Keth stepped forward, each footfall echoing like it didn't belong to him. Behind him, the others lingered at the threshold, unwilling to cross whatever invisible line this place marked. The walls pulsed faintly, organic circuits mapping out ghost signals as if remembering what it once protected. A crystalline pillar stood in the center of the chamber, its surface shimmering with faint blue light. Keth reached out. As his fingers brushed it, the vault came alive. Dozens of holograms burst into motion, fractured memories stitched together by failing data cores. There were no labels, no timeline. Just moments. An alien dreadnought, proud and armored, disintegrated in orbit before it could fire a shot. A council chamber screaming in chaos as a message replayed on every display. "You should have let us walk away." Children carried from shelters into converted medical labs, human soldiers removing helmets to reveal faces younger than Keth had expected. Not warriors, survivors. Then came the footage that silenced even the air. A single human in powered armor stepping into an ambush. 10 Concordat soldiers against one. The feed went black in under 20 seconds. The system reoriented. A voice, clear and deliberate, filled the room. Playback authorized. Designation, Operation Red Hand. Date, Final Cycle, Pre-erasure. The hologram shifted again. A command room. Panic in real time. Concordat officers shouting over one another as planetary defenses failed. No incoming missiles. No hacking attempts. Just collapse. Explain this, barked a voice. A technician turned. They've infected our logic arrays. Our ships are questioning orders. The fleets are voting on whether to fight. Another officer spat. That's not possible. You can't infect strategy. You can if you weaponize empathy, the technician said, shaking. They're broadcasting the names of every soldier we've lost. Our own AI cores are calling for ceasefires. The feed cut out. Keth turned to the crew. No one spoke. Eric stared at the last image. A human soldier holding a child with one arm, the other arm replaced by something clearly not biological. I don't understand, Eric murmured. They had the tech. They had the numbers. They could have taken everything. Why vanish? Keth looked at the blinking pillar. Because that wasn't the point. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to be remembered. He didn't notice when the floor shifted beneath him. The chamber adjusted, revealing a second platform slowly rising. It carried something encased in stasis, angular, matte black, humming quietly. A drone? A weapon? No, an archive unit. It opened. The room dimmed as a recording began. Not a visual. Just audio. A man's voice. Human. They said we were too wild. That we couldn't be reasoned with. That our minds were unstable. Maybe they were right. Maybe they saw something we hadn't yet become. The voice was calm. Worn down, but not broken. They erased us. Not from history, but from fear. We terrified them not because of our brutality, but because we were better at restraint. The unit paused. Then continued quieter. You destroyed our homeworld's moons. Cracked the crust of 3 colonies. Poisoned our atmospheres. And we still offered negotiations. Still sent envoys. When they didn't return, we stopped asking. The silence after was crushing. Keth's chest tightened. Not from fear. From shame. The crew shifted behind him. One of them finally asked, Do we keep going? Keth didn't answer. He walked deeper into the structure. The hall led to what looked like a control center. It didn't hum, it breathed. At its center stood a sarcophagus of steel and glass, sealed with rusted authority. Monitors displayed internal vitals. Still functioning. Subject COL, Malik Voss. Status, cryostasis. Clearance, authority prime only. Without hesitation, Keth pressed his hand to the console. The system scanned him, paused, then unlocked. Pressure valves hissed. Ice vapor flooded outward. The glass retreated slowly. The figure inside took a breath. Then another. Then opened his eyes. They were silver. Not mechanical. Just beyond. The man sat up. He scanned the room without urgency, as if he'd been awake the whole time and only now decided to respond. Name, he said flatly. Keth stepped forward. Keth Ilin. Valari. Historian. Malik Voss rose from the cradle like gravity meant nothing. His movements were smooth, unnatural. Not machine. Something refined through war, not built for it. You activated the beacon? He asked. Keth nodded. Voss studied him for a moment longer. Then it started. What is? Keth asked. Voss turned, heading toward the exit without another word. Keth followed, but his voice cracked as he asked, Why did you all disappear? Voss stopped. Because we gave you mercy. And mercy demanded we vanish. But if you're here, someone remembered. Someone looked. His gaze swept over the crew. And now, the stars will listen again. Keth reached for understanding, desperation bleeding into his voice. Are you here to fight? No, Voss said. I already did that. Now I'm here to remind. From the command center, pulses of data streamed upward into orbit. Across the galaxy, dormant satellites blinked. Long-lost frequencies activated. Beacons flared on long-dead worlds. Ships buried under ice and ash responded with ancient protocol pings. The whisper began again. Not loud. Not with words. But with presence. The Concordat would feel it first. Systems long secure would begin to fracture under the weight of reactivated code. Civilian networks would receive flickers of intercepted broadcasts. Every species who had forgotten would feel it in the pit of their stomachs before they saw a single image. And when they asked what it was, no one would answer. Because no one wanted to say the name. But it would echo anyway. Through signal static. Through old recordings. Through the eyes of a man reborn in the silence of his own legend. Humanity. Keth didn't remember walking. He only realized they were moving when the corridor began to glow with each step Voss took ahead of him. The crew followed, silent, no one willing to break the current. Even Eric, whose default expression was usually skepticism, looked like a man pacing the edge of revelation. They passed what looked like walls, but the material was something else, alive, maybe. It reacted to Voss, like it had been waiting for him. Voss stopped near a tall obsidian panel and placed his hand on it. It pulsed once, then split open with a hydraulic sigh, revealing what lay beyond. Ships. Not dozens, thousands. Buried beneath the planet's surface, cloaked in inertia shells, ready. You're activating them, Keth said, not quite a question. They've always been listening, Voss replied. Waiting for my voice. But you said you weren't here to fight, Keth pressed. Voss looked at him then, really looked. I'm not. But if the galaxy sees our return and chooses war, then mercy will not come a second time. Keth swallowed the question, burning his tongue. But the ships. The scale. The preparation. Why build a fleet to rival the Concordat's largest strongholds, only to disappear? Voss stepped onto a narrow dais, and the chamber vibrated around him. The walls shifted, displaying starscapes, data streams, communication routes. Every Concordat world lit up in red pulses. A targeting interface, elegant and devastating. This isn't an invasion, Voss said, as if reading Keth's thoughts. It's a warning. The last one. But why now? Because they've begun erasing again, Voss said quietly. Not just us. Others. Small species, loud ones, ones who question too much. History is being cleaned. Keth's stomach dropped. The patterns made sense now. Missing records. Whole planets unaccounted for. Discrepancies chalked up to data degradation. But it wasn't decay. It was design. You saw the logs, Voss continued. You followed them here. You chose to remember. But what happens if they ignore the warning? Then we give them a new kind of silence. He issued a command. The chamber pulsed. Across dead systems, across light years, dormant machines stirred. Keth turned to Eric, who shook his head slowly. We just lit a signal fire in the middle of a powder field. Let it burn, Voss said. If truth's going to return, it has to be louder than the lie. In the command nexus, a final layer of encryption fell away. A timer appeared. 5 minutes. A wave pulse was charging, compressed signal. Every atrocity the Concordat had buried, every erased name, every silenced broadcast, ready to hit every network at once. You're not just bringing back the past, Keth realized. You're weaponizing memory. Voss gave a half-smile. You fear war, but it already happened. What I'm doing is worse than weapons. I'm forcing them to remember who they were when they thought they were righteous. The countdown ticked. Keth stared at it, conflicted. But deep down, he didn't want to stop it. You're using us, he said finally. You let us find you. I needed witnesses, Voss replied. Voices not mine. Yours. Alien, neutral, undeniable. This isn't vengeance. This is clarity. And then the pulse fired. Across the galaxy, time broke open. Every screen, every data node, every ship, every home, from mining colonies to political halls, flashed with truth. The feed couldn't be blocked. The images were layered, impossible to misinterpret. There were no edits, no commentary. Just raw history. The Concordat's inner council chambers erupted into chaos. Civilian uprisings began within minutes. Riots. Protests. Some species tried to deny it, others tried to delete it. But the pulse had replicated into local storage. It lived now in every archive. It could not be erased again. Ships deployed across major sectors didn't fire. Instead, they hovered. Visible. Watchful. Judging. The Spiral Alliance fractured by noon. Keth stood in the observation dome, watching the data returns flood in. "You broke them," he whispered. Voss stood beside him, arms folded behind his back. "No. I held up the mirror. They broke themselves." Keth turned. "And if they beg for peace now?" Voss tilted his head. "Then they'll have to build it. Without lies. Without censorship. Without fear." "What about us?" Keth asked. "Why let us live? Why not disappear again?" Voss finally looked at him. "Because your kind listened. When others turned away. That matters." The ship rumbled. Another wave went out, this one not of memory, but of declaration. A message spoken in every tongue, on every frequency. "We are not conquerors. We are the reminder. We do not seek war. But we will not be forgotten again." Keth exhaled, the tension leaving his chest for the first time in days. This wasn't peace. It wasn't war. It was something older, an equilibrium born of consequence. "You've done what the Concordat feared most," he said. "What's that?" "Given the galaxy its own reflection." Voss turned away, the faintest smirk on his lips. "About time it looked." The Concordat's response came faster than expected. Less than 12 hours after the pulse swept through their networks, fleets scrambled into defensive formation across 4 sectors. Emergency sessions were called. War declarations hovered on the tips of trembling tongues, but none had the nerve to be the first to speak them aloud. Not yet. Keth stood inside the signal command chamber, monitoring the galaxy's panic unravel in real time. Planetary feeds saturated with riots, resignations, and a tide of confusion turned confession. Civilian populations screamed for explanations. Some demanded war. Others demanded forgiveness. The truth had ripped them open, and they didn't know what to do with the bleeding. "They're unraveling," Eric muttered, fingers dancing over the console. "No coordinated counter-signal. No spin. No narrative. They never prepared for memory as a weapon." Voss didn't smile. He studied the holographic map silently, watching one sector flare red as a Concordat dreadnought group breached its own orbital quarantine protocols. The ships weren't heading toward human space. They were heading toward their own capital. "This was never about revenge," Voss said. "But that doesn't mean we won't be dragged into it." Keth turned. "You expected they'd self-destruct. I hoped they wouldn't." "Then why the fleets?" Keth asked. "In case I was right," Voss replied. The transmissions had done their work. Species once loyal to the Concordat began cutting ties. Alliances dissolved overnight. The illusion of control cracked. And in the vacuum, fear rushed in like fire through an open hatch. The message had been simple, but effective. A single truth: humanity had never been defeated. They had simply walked away. Now that truth was out, the galaxy didn't know whether to feel ashamed or terrified. "New signal," Eric called. "Encrypted. Concordat strategic relay. It's a direct broadcast to us." Voss nodded. "Put it through." A holographic projection shimmered into view. High Chancellor Velevin. One of the few Concordat leaders still standing after the pulse. Her voice was even, but her eyes betrayed something older than panic. "You've made your point," she said. "The pulse shattered more than just illusions. You've destabilized civilization on a scale we haven't seen since pre-fold wars. Billions are in revolt." Voss didn't flinch. That was your doing. Not mine. You could have stopped at truth, she snapped. But you weaponized it. You infected every archive. There's no going back. That's the point, Voss said. Back was the problem. She leaned forward, as if trying to reach him through the transmission. What do you want, Malik Voss? What's the endgame? Voss studied her face for a long beat. Accountability. You think exposing our past will bring justice? I think burying it nearly brought extinction, Voss said coldly. Not ours. Yours. We warned you once. You tried to erase us. So we left. This time, we're staying, to watch. Velivan's voice dropped to a whisper. There are those calling for your extermination. For full mobilization. They had their chance to kill us, Voss said. They used it. And we're still here. She stared at him, helpless and hollow. This will spiral. It already has. The signal cut. Silence stretched. Then, alarms flared. Incoming Concordat battle group, Eric shouted. Not a probe, full assault formation. Warpath trajectory. Keth's heart seized. They're going to make an example. They're going to try. Voss corrected. He activated a command sequence. All around them, the ancient planetary defense system lit up. Cloaked satellites blinked into orbit. Subterranean cannons armed. Thousands of dormant ships hummed to life. But they didn't launch. They hovered. Watching. This isn't a war, Voss said. This is a message. One last time. The Concordat fleet entered range. 32 capital ships, dozens of destroyers. All armed. All aimed at Aurelia. Then they saw the human ships. The ones that didn't exist on any register. Hulls without signatures. Warcraft designed not to intimidate, but to erase. Even the bravest Concordat commander would recognize the suicide in opening fire. No words were exchanged. No ultimatums. Just silence. And then, the Concordat fleet began to scatter. 2 ships turned first. Then 5. Then the rest broke formation. No shots fired. No damage exchanged. Just surrender by choice. Keth exhaled, chest tight with disbelief. They walked away. Voss looked tired. They remembered. In the days that followed, something unprecedented happened. Concordat archives reopened. Civilian sectors demanded unfiltered access to historical data. Entire fleets laid down weapons. Species began holding internal trials, not because they were forced, but because they finally saw. Across the galaxy, human ships remained visible but still. As if daring anyone to forget again. Voss convened with Keth one last time before disappearing again, his figure framed by a sky no longer silent. We could have ended them, Keth said. They would have deserved it. Voss nodded. And that's why we didn't? You think they'll learn? No, Voss said. But they'll remember. And next time they choose silence, it won't be out of fear. It'll be out of respect. Keth didn't ask where Voss was going. Some truths were better left wandering. As Voss stepped aboard his ship, Keth heard the last words he'd ever speak. We never needed to be worshipped. Just remembered. Then he was gone. And the galaxy was no longer the same. The whispers began before the fleets withdrew. Not messages, not commands, just fragments. Unanchored signals looping across systems, picking up in the background of idle conversations. Words no one admitted to hearing. A voice they couldn't trace, but couldn't ignore. It wasn't human. Not entirely. It carried the weight of something that had watched 1,000 years of denial and waited, not in anger, but in certainty. Keth returned to the Valari homeworld as a historian. He was no longer welcomed as one. His credentials were stripped. His access revoked. The council issued a formal reprimand for breaching protocol, accompanied by quiet instructions to remain out of sight. Not imprisoned, not silenced. Just erased politely. The kind of disappearance reserved for those who had been proven right too loudly. He didn't argue. He'd seen how institutions fought harder to preserve comfort than truth. The people were different. Quiet glances, hesitant nods, strangers leaving encrypted fragments on his terminal. Quotes from the pulse. Coordinates to places thought destroyed. Eyes too afraid to speak, but burning with the knowledge that things had shifted, and wouldn't shift back. Keth archived everything. Not on official servers. He used physical drives, distributed across backwater stations and merchant freighters. History, he realized, couldn't be centralized. Not anymore. It had to live like they had, between systems, among people, too decentralized to kill. When the messages started appearing across Concordat civilian boards, no one claimed them. They were elegant, brief, impossible to scrub. What we buried woke up. What we forgot remembered. We were warned. They didn't carry threats. Just reminders. Each followed by a glyph, the same red H found etched into black steel hulls now parked at the edge of quiet systems. The human fleets hadn't moved since the standoff. They just existed. Present, visible, patient. Some called it psychological warfare. Others saw it as faith. The Concordat dissolved without ceremony. Systems pulled out one by one. Not in rebellion. In fatigue. They'd built an empire on omission, and now omission had collapsed under its own weight. Some tried to restore it. Others didn't bother. Keth was invited to a gathering on Kalen's moon. Not a formal summit, just a dozen species meeting without translators, weapons, or recording equipment. He expected suspicion. He found exhaustion. They didn't talk about war. They talked about memory. What they had lost. What they had erased. What came next? Keth listened. Then spoke only once. Truth doesn't require belief. It only needs to be found again. That was enough. Voss hadn't been seen since the fleets scattered. Rumors placed him in black zones, training orphan systems on how to resist narrative manipulation. Others said he returned to Earth, though no one could prove Earth still existed. The system, last mapped over 600 years ago, showed nothing. Just an empty quadrant marked with a single note, restricted. Hazardous remnants. Some insisted the hazard was spiritual. A year passed. Then another. The pulse was no longer referenced in official records. No one dared delete it again, but governments quietly diverted attention, pushed reconstruction campaigns, rewrote their own timelines to include shared failure. The red H kept appearing. On monuments. Data logs. Even in dreams, some claimed. Keth received a message from a contact he never gave his location. A simple packet. No sender. Inside, a single audio file. It was Voss. I told them we'd watch. But watching is a burden. We carry it alone, because no one wants to be the mirror. They only want the reflection. But reflection without witness is delusion. You were the first to look back without fear. That's why you're still alive. The audio cut to static, then ended. Keth didn't play it again. He didn't need to. Years later, when Concordat territory had been fractured into dozens of independent zones, the galaxy entered what historians would later call the silent correction. Laws changed. Education shifted. Archive access became a basic right. Peace didn't arrive, but understanding did. The human fleets, untouched for half a decade, began to vanish. One by one. No conflict. No transmission. Just gone. As if erasing themselves on their terms. Choosing obscurity over deification. But they left something behind. Each planet where a fleet had rested found a sealed container. Always buried just deep enough to require effort. Inside, records. Not of war. Of poetry. Music. Letters. Instructions on how to build shelters from storms humanity had never seen but somehow predicted. Maps of stars still unseen by current drives. Warnings about specific energy signatures. Calculations for hypothetical extinction-level events. And always, at the end, a phrase. We lost our home to silence. Don't let silence become your legacy. Keth became a teacher. quietly, unofficially. He didn't stand at podiums. He wrote books no state approved. Gave lectures to any species willing to host him in libraries, not halls. He answered questions, but never speculated. His job, as he saw it, wasn't to explain humanity. It was to explain why forgetting them had been so easy. And why it had been the most dangerous mistake they'd ever made. In his final public address, years before he faded into chosen anonymity, he left one closing statement. They never asked us to understand them. Only to remember they were real. That they tried. That they didn't return for revenge. They returned to ensure no one else would ever vanish the way they did. And they succeeded. Not with violence, but with memory. We were the ones who taught them war. They were the ones who taught us what comes after. After that, no red glyphs were seen again. The galaxy finally exhaled. But it never forgot.